My son was about to marry the woman I suspected was only after one thing, my late husband's fortune. But I couldn't say anything, not yet. And thank goodness I didn't. Because a week after their wedding, she showed up at my door with a lawyer and a contract in her hand. I remember that morning so clearly, the sound of my doorbell, the echo of my footsteps on the hardwood floor, and the way her smile didn't reach her eyes. In her hands was a leather folder, thick and heavy, and beside her stood a man in a crisp suit holding a briefcase. My heart began to race because I knew whatever she was about to say wasn't a request, it was a demand. That was the moment I realized my silence had protected me more than I could have ever imagined. If you think family can never turn against you, stay with me until the end. What you're about to hear might change the way you see trust, love, and money forever. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you love stories about family secrets and revenge, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who'd appreciate it. My name is Margaret Whitmore. I'm 67 years old, and for most of my life, I thought I understood what it meant to build something that lasts: a family, a home, and a legacy. My late husband, Harold, believed the same. He was the kind of man who believed in hard work, decency, and privacy. When he passed away suddenly, it felt as though the ground beneath me had collapsed. One morning, I was his wife. By nightfall, I was a widow holding together an empire neither of us had ever meant to flaunt. Harold left behind $45 million in assets, properties, shares, and the Whitmore Foundation we started together to help underprivileged families. But that number never felt real to me. It wasn't money. It was years of our sweat, our nights spent planning, saving, and building a name we hoped would outlive us. When people hear about fortune, they picture yachts, luxury, and power. I only saw Harold's empty chair at the dinner table. I never talked about the inheritance with our only son, Jackson. He was 33, then young, ambitious, and proud. Harold and I had always agreed our son needed to make his own way. We gave him an education, love, and values, but not a roadmap paved with gold. Jackson worked in architecture, modestly but passionately, and I respected that. He never asked about the estate, and I never offered details. There are things you hold back, not out of secrecy, but out of protection. I wanted him to live free from the shadow of our wealth, to choose people for who they were, not for what they could gain. Then, one afternoon, Jackson brought her home, Amelia. I remember her like a perfect picture. The flawless smile, the soft curls, the voice that lingered just a second too long on compliments. She was beautiful, no doubt, polished, educated, but behind her charm was something I couldn't name at first. The kind of presence that makes you straighten your back without knowing why. She walked into our house and looked around as though memorizing every detail: the chandelier, the antique clock Harold restored by hand, the photographs lining the staircase. "This place is stunning," she said softly, tracing her finger along the banister. Then she looked at me and smiled. "Jackson must have had a wonderful childhood here." I smiled back politely, but in that instant, I saw something flicker in her eyes, not admiration, but calculation. That look never left me. As months passed, I noticed the small things, questions that seemed harmless, but carried an edge. "Mrs. Whitmore, do you plan to stay in this big house all alone? Or, does Jackson ever talk about what he'll inherit someday?" They were spoken lightly, followed by a laugh, but each time I felt a chill run through me. It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it, like someone checking locks on doors before deciding which one to open. One evening, after dinner, I confided in my oldest friend, Carol. She had known Harold and me since our early days, when the foundation was just an idea scribbled on a napkin. Carol listened quietly, then said what I had been too polite to admit aloud. "Be careful, Margaret. That girl looks like she's counting your money already." I wanted to dismiss it, to believe I was overreacting, that I was seeing shadows where there were none. After all, Jackson looked happier than I'd seen him in years. And what kind of mother tries to find fault in her son's joy? Still, every instinct whispered to me that love built on calculation doesn't last. Harold used to tell me, when people show too much interest in what's yours, it's because they see it as theirs. That memory haunted me more than I cared to admit. So, I said nothing. I smiled through dinners, through wedding plans, through conversations that made my stomach twist. And in my silence, I started to see patterns the way Amelia avoided talking about her own family, how she insisted on handling certain payments directly, how she always mentioned our future when referring to Jackson's finances, but never their life together. I tried to convince myself that maybe it was love. Love can make people curious, ambitious, even protective. But when I overheard her on the phone one evening saying, "He doesn't even know how much she's worth," I froze. She didn't notice me standing by the hallway. I walked quietly to my room and sat there for hours, staring at the framed photo of Harold on my dresser. He had warned me about people like her. And yet, there I was, watching history attempt to repeat itself through my own child. I decided then that silence would be my weapon. If she wanted to measure me by my fortune, she would soon learn it wasn't for sale. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. If you've ever trusted someone who later made you question your instincts, this story will hit close to home. Stay with me, because what comes next will make you understand why sometimes saying nothing is the only way to save everything. When the wedding preparations began, I told myself I'd do what any loving mother would do to make sure my son had the wedding of his dreams. Jackson was my only child. I'd watched him grow from a curious boy who used to fix broken radios with his father into a confident man ready to start his own family. So, when he told me he wanted a grand ceremony, I didn't hesitate. I quietly handled the bills, the venue, the flowers, the catering, even the designer gown Amelia had her eye on. I didn't tell a soul how much it all cost. Money had never been my way of showing power. It was my way of showing love. And for Jackson, I wanted nothing but joy. But from the very beginning, Amelia made sure I was on the sidelines. She called the shots on every detail: the guest list, the seating arrangements, the music, even the menu. At first, I brushed it off as youthful enthusiasm, but then came the exclusive guest list. I remember the call vividly. Amelia's voice was sweet, but laced with something sharp underneath. "Margaret, I hope you don't mind, but we're keeping the guest list really tight. Just close friends, you know? It's more modern that way." I smiled through the phone. "Of course, dear. Whatever makes you happy." But as I hung up, I realized none of my friends, not one, had received an invitation. It was clear. She didn't want my presence to shine at that wedding. Still, I stayed silent. Love can make you ignore warning signs, and I loved my son more than my pride. As the wedding day drew closer, I found myself showing up at the boutique alone, making payments behind the scenes. Every time I asked Amelia if she needed help with something, she'd smile and say, "Oh, you've done enough already. Just relax and enjoy being retired." Retired. That word stung. I wasn't some helpless old woman. I had managed an empire beside Harold for decades. But I swallowed my pride and nodded politely. Then came the rehearsal dinner. It was held at a lavish restaurant downtown, soft lighting, champagne glasses clinking, laughter floating through the air. I wore Harold's favorite pearl necklace and a soft blue dress he'd always said made my eyes sparkle. When it was time for introductions, Amelia took the microphone. She smiled, that practiced smile that never reached her eyes, and said, "Everyone, this is Jackson's mother, Margaret Whitmore, the retired widow." The room chuckled politely, unaware of the condescension dripping from her tone. I forced a smile, my hands gripping the tablecloth beneath. Retired widow. Not the woman who raised him, not the woman who built the Whitmore legacy beside her late husband. Just a title stripped of dignity. I looked across the table at Jackson, hoping for a sign, a glance, a squeeze of the hand, anything to show he noticed. But he just laughed awkwardly and sipped his wine. I excused myself a few minutes later, pretending to take a call, but when I reached the restroom, I caught my reflection in the mirror, calm, composed, but with eyes that had seen too much. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, looking out at the garden Harold and I once planted together. The moonlight fell across his old rocking chair, empty now but full of memories. My heart felt heavy. Something deep inside whispered to me, "Amelia isn't marrying your son. She's marrying into your fortune." And for the first time since Harold's death, I felt the chill of fear settle in my chest. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something told me Amelia wasn't marrying my son. She was marrying into my fortune. The morning of the wedding arrived bathed in gold sunlight, the kind that seems to promise happiness. I woke up early, made myself a cup of chamomile tea, and sat by the window watching the day come alive. Birds sang outside, and the city seemed to hum with joy. But inside my chest, there was only silence, that heavy kind that presses down when something feels wrong. I put on my silver gown, one I'd chosen carefully elegant, respectful, not too loud. Harold used to say, "You don't need to shine, Maggie. You are the light." I smiled at the memory and whispered, "I hope you're watching, Harold. Our boy's getting married today." At the venue, everything looked perfect. Rows of white roses lined the aisle, the string quartet played softly, and the air smelled of vanilla and promise. Guests turned as I entered, some smiling, others whispering. I could hear the faint rustle of curiosity. Everyone knew I was the late Harold Whitmore's widow, and everyone knew about the fortune he'd left behind. Jackson stood at the altar, looking radiant and nervous, his tie slightly crooked the way it always was. And then came Amelia, breathtaking in lace and diamonds. She moved down the aisle like she'd been waiting her whole life for that moment. The vows were emotional. Jackson's voice cracked when he promised to love her, for richer or for poorer, and I felt tears rise in my eyes. But when it was Amelia's turn, her voice was smooth, too smooth. "I promise to stand by you, through every chapter of our life," she said, her gaze flicking briefly to the front row, where a man sat older, refined, dressed in a tailored gray suit. His eyes met hers for a fleeting second, and something passed between them. Something private, something rehearsed. I noticed, and my heart clenched. He wasn't family. He wasn't a friend. But Amelia smiled at him the way you do when you share a secret. I leaned toward one of Harold's old business partners seated beside me and whispered, "Do you know that man?" He shook his head. "Never seen him before." As the ceremony went on, I watched Amelia closely. Every time someone mentioned family, her expression hardened slightly, like she was guarding herself. During her toast at the reception, she spoke about love, success, and new beginnings, but never once did she mention the word legacy. That word, the one Harold and I built our lives around, was invisible to her, and that told me everything I needed to know. After the ceremony, guests danced, glasses clinked, and laughter filled the air. I tried to join in, smiled for photos, hugged relatives, even held Amelia's bouquet for a picture. But my heart wasn't there. My instincts wouldn't let me relax. Then, just as I was about to leave, my phone buzzed in my purse, an unknown number. I stepped away from the music and answered softly, "Hello?" There was a pause. Then a woman's voice, low, shaky, almost whispering, "Watch your back, she's planning something." Before I could speak, the line went dead. I stood there frozen, the sound of the string quartet echoing faintly behind me. I looked around, everyone was laughing, dancing, living in that moment. No one else seemed to notice the invisible storm gathering in the corner of that perfect day. I slipped my phone back into my purse and looked toward Amelia. She was standing under the fairy lights, glass of champagne in hand, her smile gleaming like polished glass. The mysterious man in the gray suit was speaking quietly to her, and when she nodded, it wasn't the nod of a bride, it was the nod of someone sealing a deal. That was the moment I knew whatever was coming, it wasn't going to be about love. It was going to be about control, about power, about everything Harold and I had built. As the night ended, the guests began to leave, and Jackson and Amelia drove off to their honeymoon in a vintage white convertible. Everyone waved and cheered, everyone except me. I stood there in the soft glow of the garden lights, clutching my shawl against the cold. The laughter faded, the music dimmed, and I whispered to myself, "Harold, I think our boy just married trouble." Then I turned toward the empty mansion and walked back to my car, feeling the weight of the night settle like fog on my shoulders. A week later, I found out exactly what she was planning, and it almost cost us everything. It was a quiet Thursday morning when the doorbell rang, the kind of morning where the house felt too still, too orderly, as if it was holding its breath. I had just finished watering the plants Harold and I planted years ago. The roses were finally blooming again, and I remember smiling faintly at them before walking toward the sound of the bell. When I opened the door, there she was, Amelia, perfectly dressed, as always. Her posture was flawless, her smile wide enough to seem kind but tight enough to hide intention. and beside her stood a man, the same older man from the wedding, now holding a sleek leather briefcase. His expression was professional, detached, like he'd done this many times before. "Good morning, Margaret," she began, her tone warm but rehearsed. "I hope we're not interrupting anything." I simply nodded and stepped aside, letting them in. My heart was already beating faster than I wanted to admit. They walked into Harold's old study, a place filled with his books, awards, and the faint scent of cedarwood polish. It felt wrong having them there. We sat down. Amelia crossed her legs delicately, glancing around as if she was already imagining herself owning everything in sight. The lawyer opened his briefcase with a practiced motion and pulled out a stack of documents neatly clipped together. He cleared his throat. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "we've drafted a proposal that we believe would be beneficial to the family's future." Amelia leaned forward, smiling at me as if we were old friends. "It's just a formality, really," she added softly. "A family wealth consolidation plan. Jackson and I want to make sure everything you and Harold worked for stays in the family for generations to come." Her words were sugar, but her eyes were steel. The lawyer slid the document toward me. The heading was bold: Family Wealth Consolidation and Joint Family Trust Agreement. Beneath it, lines and paragraphs of legal jargon and one clause that caught my eye. It stated that 60% of the Whitmore estate, including all financial and real estate holdings, would be transferred into a family trust managed jointly by Jackson and Amelia Whitmore. 60%? I asked quietly. Amelia nodded, her tone light. "For future grandchildren. For the Whitmore legacy. You've always been such a strong example, Margaret. This is just securing what you and Harold built." I stared at her, wondering if she could hear the echo of my heartbeat. She spoke about legacy like it was a trophy, not a lifetime of sacrifice. The lawyer continued, "You'd retain 40% for personal use, of course, and you'd be a named advisor on the trust. It's all perfectly reasonable." Perfectly reasonable, those were the words he chose. But reason has a way of sounding dangerous when it comes dressed in charm. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I studied Amelia. Her hands rested calmly on her lap, her engagement ring glinting in the morning light. Her expression never faltered, not even when I folded the paper slowly, deliberately, and set it on the table. I said quietly, "You know, Harold always believed in earning before inheriting." Amelia smiled too quickly. "Of course, that's why this is a partnership, a family plan." Her lawyer added, "There's no pressure to decide now, Mrs. Whitmore. But the sooner this is finalized, the sooner the assets can be properly safeguarded." I nodded politely, though inside I was trembling not from fear, but from clarity. This wasn't about protection. It was about control. About taking the Whitmore fortune before I was even gone. I stood up, my voice calm. "I'll review it with my own attorney." Amelia blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "Oh, of course, we just thought—" "That would be all for now," I interrupted gently. "Thank you both for coming." The lawyer began to gather his papers. Amelia hesitated, looking like she wanted to say more but decided against it. As they walked to the door, she turned slightly and said, "I really hope we can keep this all family-friendly, Margaret." Her words lingered like perfume, sweet but suffocating. When the door closed behind them, I stood in silence. The sound of their car pulling away faded slowly, leaving only the ticking of Harold's old clock echoing through the house. I walked back to the study, unfolded the document, and stared at it again. Every word on that page was a warning, not just about greed, but about how easily love can disguise ambition. Would you have signed it? Tell me in the comments below. And before we move on, if you're still watching this far, that tells me you care about stories that reveal what people are truly capable of when money and loyalty collide. Don't just watch, silently hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss what happens next, because what Amelia did after this meeting changed everything. After Amelia and that lawyer left my home, the air in the house felt heavier. Harold's study still smelled faintly of his cologne, sandalwood, and quiet authority, but that morning, even that comfort couldn't still my nerves. I kept looking at the document she'd handed me, reading it over and over again, each word tightening something deep in my chest. It was written too cleverly, too confidently, as if they already knew I'd sign. That night, I called someone I hadn't spoken to since Harold's funeral, Mr. Dean. He'd been Harold's personal attorney for over 20 years. A kind man with gray hair, steady hands, and the sort of honesty you could feel before he even opened his mouth. When he answered, his tone softened immediately. "Margaret, it's been too long. How are you holding up?" I hesitated. "I've been better," I said. "I think I need your help." The next morning, he arrived at my house with a leather briefcase and that same look of quiet concern he used to give Harold before every major business deal. I handed him the contract without saying much. He adjusted his glasses and began to read. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock on the mantel. 10 minutes later, he looked up. His expression was grim. "Margaret," he said, carefully choosing his words, "this isn't a trust, it's a transfer of ownership. Once you sign this, everything you and Harold built, the properties, the shares, even the foundation would belong to them." I felt the blood drain from my face. "All of it?" He nodded. "Every cent. You'd still appear as an advisor, but you'd have no control. They could legally sell or liquidate every asset in the Whitmore name, and you couldn't stop them." I sat back in my chair, staring at the papers as if they were written in fire. For a long time, I said nothing. Then finally, I whispered, "I knew it. I knew she was after the money." Mr. Dean folded his hands. "Do you trust your son?" I swallowed hard. "I want to, but love blinds people. She has him wrapped around her finger." He sighed and pulled a folder from his case. "I did some background digging when I heard your son was getting married. I didn't want to say anything without proof. But Margaret, there's something you should see." Inside the folder were a few documents, printouts, old records, photographs. At the top of one page was a name I recognized immediately. Amelia Carter. Only this was dated years before she met Jackson. "She was married before?" I asked quietly. Mr. Dean nodded. "Yes. The marriage was annulled, but the records were sealed shortly after. It took some time to confirm, but something doesn't add up. The family she married into, the Bennetts, lost almost everything within a year. Investments drained, properties sold under strange circumstances. She disappeared shortly after the annulment." I sat there frozen, clutching the papers. "She did this before." He leaned forward. "And if I were you, I'd be very careful. This isn't just about your money, Margaret. It's about control. Once she has the assets, she'll have your son too, because she'll hold his lifestyle in her hands." That night, I couldn't eat. The words, transfer of ownership, echoed in my head like a haunting melody. I went upstairs to Harold's old study and opened the drawer where we used to keep our files. His voice felt so close in that moment, calm, practical, wise. He always said, "When something doesn't feel right, follow the trail. It will always lead you to the truth." So, I followed it. The next morning, I drove to the county courthouse. I didn't tell Jackson, I didn't even tell Mr. Dean I was going. I wore a simple coat and kept my hair pinned up, trying to look like just another elderly woman handling errands. Inside, the clerk helped me find what I was looking for. There it was, the record of Amelia's previous marriage. Though most of it was sealed, a few lines were visible. "Annulment granted, financial misconduct under investigation." I asked if I could request limited public documents. The clerk hesitated, then nodded slowly. "We can give you access to the public hearing notes." It took an hour, but when I finally sat down with the file, my hands trembled as I turned the pages. Amelia's name appeared again and again. The Bennett family's lawyer testified that she'd manipulated joint accounts, encouraged risky investments, and transferred funds into a family management company, one registered solely in her name. And then there was a line that nearly stopped my heart. Defendant's counsel reached a private settlement. Records sealed under court order. A settlement, a payoff, and a clean slate. Amelia had done this before, married, charmed, drained a family of everything they owned, and walked away untouched. And now, she'd set her sights on my son. As I drove home, my hands gripping the wheel tightly, I realized this wasn't about suspicion anymore. It was about survival, not just mine, but Jackson's future. Because if she could do this twice, she could do it again. When I got home, I sat in Harold's chair, staring at the fireplace until the last light faded from the windows. My heart hurt not because of the betrayal, but because my son was too blinded by love to see it. If you're still watching, take this as a quiet warning sometimes. The danger isn't the stranger outside your door. It's the smile sitting at your family's dinner table. And before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. But if you're one of those who listens, feels this kind of pain, and still hasn't subscribed yet, ask yourself, why? Why hesitate when the next part of this story might save you or someone you love from the same mistake? Hit that subscribe button now, because what I uncovered after that day made everything before look like a harmless game. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The night had been long and restless, filled with thoughts of Amelia's past, of sealed records, and of the quiet trap she'd almost led me into. The sun had barely touched the horizon when I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, the same brand Harold used to love. I needed the calm ritual of it, the smell, the warmth, something ordinary to hold on to while I prepared to do something that could change everything. I called Jackson and asked if he could come by for breakfast. He hesitated at first, said Amelia had plans, but when I told him it would just be coffee, he agreed. I could hear the distance in his voice, already not anger, but the sort of politeness people reserve for strangers. He arrived an hour later, dressed casually, smiling as though everything in his world was perfectly fine. He kissed my cheek, complimented the coffee, and asked about the garden. I watched him carefully, memorizing every expression, every word, because deep down I knew this conversation might break something between us. After a few minutes of small talk, I took a deep breath. "Jackson," I began softly, "I need to talk to you about Amelia." He looked up from his mug, his smile fading slightly. "What about her?" I chose my words carefully. "There's something you should know, something I found out recently. She was married before to a man named Bennett. The marriage ended abruptly. There were legal issues." He frowned, shaking his head. "Mom, that's ridiculous. Amelia told me everything. She said she had a difficult relationship once, but nothing like that." "Jackson, please," I said, my voice trembling. "I've seen the records. There were financial investigations. It looks like she—" He cut me off, his tone rising. "You never liked her, Mom. From the start, you've been looking for reasons to doubt her. You're judging her just like you used to judge Dad's business partners. You think everyone is trying to take something from you." The words hit harder than I expected. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. He wasn't angry, he was hurt, and that made it worse. "Jackson," I whispered, "I'm not trying to hurt you. I just want to protect you. I'm not saying this because of money or pride. I'm saying it because I love you." But he looked away, shaking his head slowly. "I think you've been alone too long, Mom. You're seeing shadows where there aren't any." The silence that followed was unbearable. The clock ticked softly behind us, and I could hear the faint sound of birds outside. He finished his coffee, stood up, and placed his hand on my shoulder. "Please, just trust me. Amelia's not who you think she is." When he left, I sat at the table for a long time, staring at the two empty cups between us. The one he drank from, still warm, and mine untouched, gone cold. That was the moment I realized something painful but true. I couldn't save my son from love. Love has a way of making even the wisest people blind. I had seen it before: Harold's loyalty to friends who betrayed him, my own devotion to keeping peace when I should have spoken up. And now, it was Jackson's turn to learn that lesson, even if it broke his heart in the process. I folded my hands in my lap and whispered softly to the empty room, "I can't save him from love, but I can save Harold's legacy." That thought anchored me. It replaced my fear with quiet determination. I knew now what I had to do. So, I stood up, cleared the cups from the table, and looked out the window toward the old oak tree Harold planted the year Jackson was born. That tree had weathered storms, droughts, and decades. It still stood tall. That's what Harold built. That's what I would protect. If you're still watching right now, ask yourself, what would you do if your child loved someone you knew would destroy them? Would you risk their anger to save them, or stay silent to keep their love? Tell me in the comments. And if you're here feeling that ache of recognition, the one that comes from being right but unheard, don't just scroll away. Subscribe, because the next part of this story isn't just about wealth, it's about justice. After Jackson left that morning, the house felt unbearably silent. His laughter, his footsteps, even the sound of his car pulling out of the driveway, they lingered in my ears like echoes of a life that was slipping away. I sat in that silence for a long time before finally whispering to myself, "Enough." If I couldn't reach my son through words, then I would protect him through action. Harold used to say, "When people play with greed, give them a stage and let them expose themselves." That became my plan. That evening, I called Amelia. My voice was soft, careful. "I've been thinking," I told her, "about what you said. Maybe you're right. Maybe consolidating the family wealth is the wise thing to do." Her tone brightened instantly. Too bright. "Oh, Margaret, I'm so glad you see it that way. You know, it's really for the best for everyone, for the future." I smiled to myself, though she couldn't see it. "Yes, you and your lawyer can come by next week. We'll go over the documents together." "Perfect," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "I'll let Mr. Stevens know. I'll have him prepare everything." "Wonderful," I replied softly. "I'll prepare my end as well." When the call ended, I set my phone down and let the mask slip. My hands were steady, my heart was not. Because this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about principle, about legacy, about a woman who thought she could outsmart the wrong widow. That night, I drove across town to Mr. Dean's office. The lights were still on. He was an old man like Harold, the kind who believed paperwork could fix the world if done properly. When I stepped inside, he looked up from his desk and smiled faintly. "Margaret," he said, "I had a feeling I'd see you again soon." I sat down and placed the so-called trust documents on his desk. "She's coming next week," I told him. "With her lawyer. I told them I'd sign." He nodded slowly, reading the papers again. "Good. Then we have just enough time." I watched as he reached for a clean folder from his drawer labeled Confidential, Estate Revision. Inside were draft pages of what would become the new foundation of everything Harold built. "I've prepared a separate trust," Mr. Dean said. "A charitable one, in Harold's name. It transfers ownership of all assets, properties, stocks, accounts into the foundation before your meeting. No one can touch it without going through the board of trustees. Not even your son." I hesitated. "Will Jackson still be provided for?" He looked up at me, eyes soft but firm. "Yes. The trust will ensure he receives an allowance, education funds for his future children, and lifetime health care. But control? No. That stays protected exactly how Harold would have wanted." I exhaled, a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "Then let's do it." For the next few days, the house became a quiet war room. Mr. Dean came by each evening, and together we went through every document, every signature, every clause, every seal. He worked tirelessly, guided by loyalty, not profit. At night, I'd sit by Harold's portrait in the hallway. His eyes, calm, steady, patient, seemed to watch me. I remembered something he once said after a bad business betrayal. "Never confront deceit head-on. Let it walk into its own reflection." So that's what I planned to do. Meanwhile, Amelia began sending cheerful messages, photos of properties she wanted to co-manage, links to vacation homes she claimed would make great investments for the family brand. She was already dreaming of control. She didn't realize the very foundation she wanted to seize was already gone, signed, sealed, and placed in Harold's name forever. On the morning of the 6th day, Mr. Dean handed me the final copy of the documents. "It's done," he said. "Everything is now under the Harold Whitmore Charitable Foundation. You, Mrs. Whitmore, are its lifetime chairperson. No one can override that without your written consent." I traced my fingers over Harold's name, embossed in gold. It felt like justice, not revenge justice. That evening, as I prepared the living room for Amelia's visit, I made sure every detail looked ordinary. Fresh flowers on the table, tea set on the tray, family photos arranged neatly on the shelves. Nothing out of place. But beneath that calm domestic scene, a storm was waiting, a storm Amelia had summoned with her greed. The trap was set. I looked at Harold's portrait one last time and whispered, "Tomorrow, love meets consequence." If you were in Margaret's shoes, would you have told your son the truth again, or let the trap play out in silence? Tell me what you'd do in the comments. The next morning, the house was filled with sunlight, the kind of bright, gentle light that hides storms beneath its glow. I woke up early, brewed coffee, and set the table with china Harold had given me on our 10th anniversary. Everything had to look effortless, peaceful, ordinary. At exactly noon, I heard the sound of heels on the front porch, sharp, confident, echoing like a countdown. When I opened the door, there she was, Amelia. Perfectly dressed in cream silk, diamond studs twinkling on her ears, perfume that smelled expensive but hollow. And beside her, that same man in a dark suit, Mr. Stevens, her lawyer carrying a sleek leather briefcase. "Margaret," she sang, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You look wonderful. Oh, I brought a little something to celebrate our new beginning." She held up a chilled bottle of champagne. The label shimmered under the light. I smiled politely. "How thoughtful." They stepped inside, their confidence filling the air like a heavy scent. Amelia glanced around, her eyes grazing over the polished mahogany furniture, the framed photos, the art Harold and I collected over the years. I could see it in her gaze. She was already measuring what she thought would soon be hers. We sat at the dining table. The documents lay neatly stacked before me, sealed in cream-colored folders. Her lawyer opened his briefcase with a quiet click and began spreading out his own papers. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said smoothly, "thank you for agreeing to this. We've made a few adjustments, mostly administrative, but overall, this is just a formality." I nodded. "Of course. I trust you've done your due diligence." Amelia gave a rehearsed smile. "This is going to make things so much easier for Jackson and me. You'll finally have less to worry about, and we can handle all the family finances." "Lovely," I murmured, folding my hands. "Let's begin." The lawyer slid the papers across to me. The contract was long pages of carefully worded deceit, disguised as joint family management. I could see the trap written in elegant font. To the untrained eye, it looked harmless. But I'd already seen the real intention buried beneath the legalese, a full transfer of ownership within 60 days. I lifted the pen. "You're sure this is what you both want?" "Absolutely," Amelia said. Her smile was dazzling victory disguised as charm. "Once it's signed, we can really move forward as a family." Her words stung, but I didn't let it show. I signed my name on the dotted line, slow, steady, deliberate. Then I placed the pen down and slid the papers back toward her. "There," I said softly. "All done." Her eyes lit up. "Perfect." But then I paused and smiled. "Oh, before you go, I'd like to give you my copy. It's only fair we all have one, don't you think?" I reached for the second folder on the table, my version. Identical on the outside, very different within. I slid it across the table and said, "Here's mine, just to ensure everything matches." Amelia exchanged a quick, nervous glance with her lawyer, as if sensing something she couldn't yet name. Mr. Stevens, trying to appear professional, took the folder and opened it. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. His expression began to shift. The confidence drained from his face, replaced by confusion, then disbelief, and finally, quiet horror. He turned pale. "Mrs. Whitmore," he began slowly, his voice faltering. This isn't the same document." Amelia frowned. "What do you mean it's not the same? She just signed it." He swallowed hard, flipping through the pages. "This version. This one transfers all holdings, properties, and accounts into the Harold Whitmore Charitable Foundation, permanently. There's no clause for joint ownership, no access rights, no residual inheritance." The silence that followed was almost musical. Amelia's face froze. "What are you talking about?" Mr. Stevens looked up, his voice trembling. "This gives everything away. To charity. It leaves nothing under your or Jackson's name." I leaned back slightly in my chair, my tone calm, almost tender. "Exactly." Amelia's jaw tightened. "What do you mean exactly?" I met her eyes. "I mean, there's no money left for anyone to steal. Not from me, not from my son, not from the legacy Harold built. Everything you thought you'd take, every dollar, every property, every share, now belongs to the Harold Whitmore Foundation, forever." Her breath caught, fury flashing across her face. "You can't do that." "Oh, but I already did," I said softly. "You wanted me to sign papers and I did, just not the ones you expected." Mr. Stevens closed the folder carefully, realizing the gravity of what had just happened. "She's within her rights, Amelia. Legally, this is airtight. There's nothing we can do." Amelia turned toward me, her voice rising. "You manipulative." "Careful," I interrupted gently. "You're in my home." The tension thickened. Even the ticking clock on the mantel seemed to pause. Amelia's perfect composure shattered, her cheeks flushed red, her voice trembling with rage. "You think this is over? Jackson will never forgive you for this." I smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "Maybe, but at least I'll sleep knowing that when I'm gone, no one can turn his love into a weapon for greed." I stood up slowly, my movements deliberate, unshaken. "Now," I said softly. If you'll excuse me, I have a board meeting to prepare for. The foundation launches tomorrow. Amelia stood too, her heels scraping the floor. You'll regret this. Perhaps, I said, meeting her glare with calm certainty. But not as much as you will. Mr. Stevens cleared his throat awkwardly and gathered his briefcase. Come on, Amelia, he murmured. We should leave. She hesitated for a moment, her fury barely contained, before storming toward the door. As they left, I walked them out with the same gentle politeness I'd shown at their wedding. When the door finally shut behind them, I let out a long, steady breath. For the first time in months, the air felt lighter. I looked toward Harold's portrait, the same calm eyes that had watched over me through every decision, every sleepless night. It's done, I whispered. They can't touch what's ours. The house was silent again, but this time, it wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. If you were in Margaret's shoes, would you have done the same? Would you protect your legacy, even if it meant losing your son's trust? Tell me in the comments below. The sun had long set when I heard the front door slam. The sound was sharp enough to rattle the picture frames on the wall. Jackson stood there, his face red, eyes blazing with anger I had never seen before. His tie was half loosened, his voice already trembling when he shouted, "What did you do, Mom?" His words carried more than frustration. They carried betrayal, confusion, and the echo of someone else's story. He didn't wait for me to answer. Amelia came home in tears, he continued, his voice breaking between breaths. She told me you gave everything away, all of Dad's hard work, all the money he wanted to leave for our future. How could you do that? Do you hate her that much? I stood there quietly, watching the son I raised tremble under the weight of someone else's manipulation. It was like seeing a stranger wearing my child's face. I took a slow breath, forcing my voice to stay calm. Jackson, I said softly, sit down. There's something you need to see. He hesitated, but the exhaustion in his eyes betrayed him. He sat down at the same table where Amelia and her lawyer had stood hours earlier, the empty champagne glasses still sitting untouched. I walked over to the cabinet, opened the drawer, and pulled out a thick brown envelope. It had the courthouse seal on it, the kind that spoke louder than any words I could say. When I placed it before him, he frowned. What's this? The truth, I said quietly. He tore the envelope open, his hands shaking slightly. The papers spilled out certified copies of court records, legal testimonies, and a newspaper clipping from 6 years ago. At first, his eyes skimmed the text without really processing it. Then I saw the moment it hit him. His lips parted, his breathing changed, and the color drained from his face. He read in silence. The documents told a story Amelia had buried, a story of another man she married before him. A man who had been wealthy, kind, and trusting. Within months of their wedding, she'd persuaded him to move his assets into her name under the pretense of building a joint business. When he refused, she filed for annulment, accusing him of emotional abuse. The case was settled quietly, and the record sealed, but not sealed enough for Mr. Dean to uncover. Jackson's hands trembled as he turned each page. This can't be real, he whispered. She said she told me. His voice broke. He looked up at me, with tears welling in his eyes. You're saying she's done this before? I didn't move closer. I didn't need to. My silence was answer enough. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Oh my God, I defended her. I told her you were just being paranoid. I yelled at you because she told me to. I wanted to comfort him, but I also knew that truth needed to hurt, because sometimes pain is the only way deception loses its power. I placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Jackson, I said softly, I didn't protect the money to hurt you. I did it to protect you. The woman you think loves you was never after your heart. She was after your name and everything tied to it. He looked up at me again, eyes red and wet, searching for something solid to hold on to. She told me you robbed us of our future, he said bitterly. I nodded slowly. I did, I replied. I robbed her of the future she planned to steal from you. He sat in silence for a long time after that. The clock ticked softly in the background, the air heavy with realization. He stared at the papers again, at Amelia's smiling face from an old photograph attached to one of the court records, and whispered, I thought she was different. I thought she loved me. I sighed, my heart aching for him. Love built on lies, I said. Isn't love, my son. It's strategy. He didn't speak for a while. When he finally did, his voice was quiet, fragile. What happens now? That, I said, depends on what kind of man you want to be after this. You can forgive her, or you can face her. But you can't pretend anymore. He nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on the documents. For the first time, I saw clarity replace anger. The illusion Amelia had built, the perfect marriage, the devoted wife, the loving partner, had cracked beyond repair. Before he left the room, he turned back toward me. "You were right," he whispered. "All along." I forced a faint smile. "I wish I wasn't." He walked out quietly, and I watched him disappear down the hallway the boy I'd raised, now carrying the weight of a truth he was never ready for. The house fell silent again. But it wasn't the silence of loneliness this time. It was the silence of truth, heavy, necessary, and final. If you've ever trusted someone who turned out to have hidden intentions, then you know the pain Margaret felt that night. Stories like this remind us that love without honesty can destroy everything. Don't just scroll past, subscribe now, because the next story might save you or someone you love from making the same mistake. And for those who refuse to subscribe, maybe you'll be the one left in the comments, wishing you'd listened sooner. Winter had turned into spring by the time peace found its way back into my home. The snow melted from the Whitmore garden, the same one Harold and I had planted years ago, and beneath it, green began to push through the soil again. Quiet, steady, persistent. Life has a way of healing itself when truth is finally allowed to breathe. Months had passed since that night. The house no longer echoed with arguments or guilt. Jackson came by one Sunday morning, unannounced, holding a small bouquet of lilies, Harold's favorite. He stood on the porch for a long moment before finally knocking, as though unsure if he still had the right to come home. When I opened the door, his eyes told me everything before his words could. The anger, the disbelief, the shame all gone, replaced by a fragile kind of peace. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You were right. About everything." I said nothing. I just stepped aside and let him in. We sat in the kitchen, the same place where he'd once defended Amelia so fiercely. Now, his shoulders were slumped, his wedding ring gone. He stared at his hands for a long time before finally speaking. "I filed for divorce," he said softly. "She didn't fight it. In fact, she already had her next move planned. Another man, another plan, another life." He gave a small, broken laugh. "I guess it wasn't about me after all." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "No, son," I said quietly. "It was never about you. But it doesn't mean you weren't worth loving. It means she didn't know how." He looked up, tears filling his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Mom. For everything. For doubting you. For letting her come between us." I smiled faintly, my heart softening. "The truth doesn't need an apology, Jackson. It just needs to be seen." He nodded, and for the first time in months, I saw the boy I'd raised, not the man lost in love, but the one Harold and I had built with values, patience, and purpose. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "I found this when I was packing," he said. "It was from Amelia, the last thing she left behind." I unfolded it slowly. Her handwriting was elegant, almost delicate. "Margaret, you may have won this round, but remember, no one wins forever. The world belongs to those who take it." I folded it back up and placed it in the fireplace beside us. The flames caught it quickly, curling the edges into ash. "Then let her have the world," I said quietly. "We'll build something better." After that day, Jackson began visiting more often, not out of guilt, but out of understanding. We planted new flowers in the garden together that spring, and for the first time in years, laughter filled the house again. But I didn't stop there. The foundation Harold and I built, the Harold Whitmore Foundation, began to grow beyond anything we imagined. Instead of serving as a shield against greed, it became a door to opportunity. I started using it to sponsor young women who wanted to start their own businesses. Women who reminded me of myself when I first met Harold, full of ambition but lacking the means. Each scholarship, each business grant, each success story felt like a seed planted in Harold's name. The fortune Amelia had tried to steal was now building lives instead of breaking them. That was the legacy I wanted my son and the world to remember. Sometimes at night, I still walk down the hallway, past Harold's portrait, and whisper, "We did it, love." Your work didn't end with you. It lives on. I often think about what this journey taught me, not about money, but about love and loss. You see, wealth can be stolen, names can be slandered, and families can be tested. But integrity, that's the one thing no one can take unless you hand it over willingly. And in the end, that's what saved us. As I look back now, I realize something simple but powerful. Money can build walls or open doors. I chose to open doors. I chose to build something no one could ever steal. If you've ever had to protect someone you love, or stand alone to do what's right when everyone else doubted you, I want to hear your story. Tell it in the comments below, because someone out there might need your strength tonight. And before you leave, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a story like this. And for those watching silently, thinking you'll subscribe later, ask yourself this: what if the next story holds the lesson you didn't know you needed? Don't wait. Hit that subscribe button now before life teaches it to you the hard way.